If you could pick 10 movies to get that 4K treatment right now, what would those 10 movies be? Well, that's what this video is all about, because I have made a list of 10 movies that I love so much and that I would really want to see get that perfect 4K treatment. So stick around if that sounds good to you. Hello, my name's Elliot and this channel is all about collecting Blu-rays. So the 4K format has had a pretty good run over the last few years. We've seen so many great releases, but the format is still sort of in its infancy, because when you look at the history of cinema, there are so many movies that we do not have on 4K Blu-ray yet. So what I've done is I've compiled a list of 10 movies that I love, that I would love to see get the 4K treatment. Now, I've tried to pick movies that are realistic in getting a 4K Blu-ray, because those super niche world cinema movies that I love so much, I mean, we're lucky that they're even on Blu-ray, let alone 4K Blu-ray. So I've picked movies that I think have a pretty good chance of getting a 4K disc over the next few years, but do let me know your thoughts on all 10 of these picks. To kick this list off, I'm going to go in with a bang, because this movie is, well, if you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. It is There Will Be Blood, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring the incredible and now retired Daniel Day-Lewis. This film is stunning to look at, and it's a film that I think would greatly benefit from being on a 4K Blu-ray. Now, it's actually quite a surprise that we haven't had any Paul Thomas Anderson films on the 4K Blu-ray format, aside from his most recent film, Phantom Thread, which, by the way, is one of my favourite films from the last few years. So if you've not seen Phantom Thread, give it a shot. The cinematography of There Will Be Blood could really pop on the 4K format. I'm thinking those wide-angle desert sequences, or the sequences at night where there's lots of fire on screen. Like, they would look incredible on the 4K format with a nice HDR grade. And that's not even to talk about the sound design of the film and the music from the great Jonny Greenwood. So all around, I think this would be a perfect fit for the 4K format. And it's about time we got more Paul Thomas Anderson films on 4K Blu-ray. I believe his new film is set to come out late in 2021, so this could just be the right time for There Will Be Blood on 4K. For this next pick, I'm casting my mind forward to October 2021, because that is the month of Halloween and horror movies in general, and it's a crime that we don't have what I consider the greatest horror movie ever made on 4K Blu-ray, and that is The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin. The Exorcist is genuinely one of the most chilling movies ever made, but just think of how good it could look on 4K. Obviously, a lot of the film is set at night, so there's a lot of dark sequences that could really benefit from an HDR grade. And just imagine seeing that vomit in HDR. You know, the colours would really pop, and that's what you want from The Exorcist on 4K. But in all seriousness, this is a no-brainer for the studios, because every time The Exorcist gets released on home video, it sells like hotcakes. So it makes sense for them to release it around Halloween, and perhaps this year could be the year. So that's why I'm picking The Exorcist. I would love to see that as the first film from William Friedkin on 4K Blu-ray. The next film that I'm going to put on this list is a family fun classic. Kids of all ages love this movie. It's Barry Lyndon from Stanley Kubrick. Now, I said I was going to try and not talk about Barry Lyndon as much on this channel, but it's my favourite film of all time. And perhaps you think it's too niche to get the 4K treatment just yet, but it's a film by Stanley Kubrick, and Kubrick has a lot of lovers all around the world. That sounded strange. I mean, a lot of people love Kubrick all around the world. We know that A Clockwork Orange is coming out on 4K Blu-ray in 2021, and perhaps the next big one is Barry Lyndon. So I've got my fingers crossed, because the 4K treatments of Kubrick's films thus far have been incredible. Also, just imagine the day when we get a complete Stanley Kubrick box set in 4K. Not like that one that's been advertised in the UK as a 4K box set, but only 2 of the films in it are 4K discs. That's just stupid. And I think a lot of people bought that thinking that the whole set was 4K. So that's a bit shady, but hopefully very soon we get a complete Stanley Kubrick box set in 4K. End of rant. Next up on this list genuinely is a family-friendly modern classic. It's Spirited Away from Studio Ghibli. Now, we don't have any Studio Ghibli films on 4K yet, but Spirited Away makes sense to be the very first one to come to 4K. Now, I know there's a lot of naysayers about hand-drawn 2D animation in 4K, but there is room for improvement with these movies on a 4K Blu-ray. It may not be as stark as perhaps 3D animation or live action, but there is definitely a lot of improvement with the sound in particular, the color grade with the HDR, and just an increase in resolution can make a big difference with 2D hand-drawn animation. We've seen some releases from Disney on the 4K format, but I think in particular the Studio Ghibli movies would be a great addition to 4K Blu-ray. For number 5, I'm going to mention Citizen Kane. Now, this is a film that I'm surprised hasn't already had a 4K release, and it was hotly rumoured 2 years ago to be the 1000 spine number in the Criterion collection. And wouldn't that have been amazing if Citizen Kane on a 4K Blu-ray would have been spine number 1000? But instead we got the Godzilla box set, which a lot of people love, so that's great. However, I still want Citizen Kane on 4K Blu-ray. Now, again, this is a film that sells incredibly when it's released on home video in every format, so it's a no-brainer financially. Now, there was a restoration a few years back, and the last Blu-ray looks pretty damn good, but I think there's still some room for improvement. We also have some naysayers about getting 4K Blu-rays of black and white films because they think the absence of colour makes it less of a big deal in getting these movies on 4K Blu-ray. Now, I understand that in terms of the HDR grade and getting brighter colours, that's what a lot of people want from a 4K disc, but you can still get a lot of mileage about the increase in contrast range, you know, the brightness and the deep blacks that could look tremendous on 4K Blu-ray. So there's still a lot of room for improvement, and for me this is a no-brainer, particularly because we recently had the film Mank from David Fincher, and I could imagine that could get a 4K Blu-ray, and Citizen Kane would be a perfect, you know, kind of counterpiece to watch at the same time. So yeah, Citizen Kane on 4K, it's a no-brainer. So we're halfway through my list of movies I would love to see get the 4K treatment, but I want to know what your choices are, so please do leave a comment down in the comment section below, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, it would be a great help to me if you subscribe and you would hear about these videos as soon as they get uploaded. Anyway, back to my list. The next film on my list is one of the funniest movies ever made, and it's Blazing Saddles from Mel Brooks. Now, it's a shame we don't have any Mel Brooks films on 4K Blu-ray. I'd happily take Young Frankenstein or The Producers over Blazing Saddles, but this one I've seen so many times and it makes me laugh more than any other film that I've ever seen. It's obviously a spoof of the Western genre, but I think even though it's a spoof, it looks as good as many great Westerns. So yeah, I would love to see it in 4K up on my 4K screen, and I would still laugh all the way through it. Now, here's a film that I think would be perfect for a 4K Blu-ray. It's a film that I think goes under the radar a lot these days, called The Fall, directed by Tarsem Singh. Now, if you don't know what The Fall is, it's a film that came out around 2008, and it's a story within a story. It's very much like The Princess Bride, where someone is narrating a story to a young child and they're imagining the story as it goes along, but the lines between reality and fiction start to blur, and it's just a magical film. But one of the greatest things about The Fall is the cinematography, and it was shot on film. It was shot over 4 years because Tarsem Singh primarily funded the entire budget of the film himself, and the budget was around $30 million. I think it only grossed about $3 million worldwide, so it was a box office flop, but all of that love and care is all up on the screen. Over those 4 years, it was shot in so many different countries, and it just looks beautiful. The locations that they chose for this film are just absolutely stunning. The Fall is perhaps the least likely of the movies on this list to get a 4K Blu-ray just because of where it stands in terms of popularity compared to the other films that I've picked. Nevertheless, it's a film that I'm hopeful about getting a 4K Blu-ray someday soon. For number 8 on this list, I have picked Deep Red, directed by Dario Argento. Now, if you're not familiar with Deep Red, it's a brilliant thriller of the giallo subgenre. It's an Italian film, but it has been dubbed in English as well, and that English dub is quite popular. So it's just one of the best thrillers that I have ever seen. Not only is it thrilling, but at parts it's horrifying, and there are some really creepy moments in this film. The reason I would love to see it on 4K is because it is a very colourful film, as the title would suggest. And it has already had a 4K restoration because it was released on Blu-ray back in 2016 by Arrow Video here in the UK. And if they've already got the restoration in their hands, it makes sense with them moving into releasing 4K Blu-rays that this is one that could be on their list. So it would not surprise me at all if we started seeing some of these Dario Argento movies on 4K Blu-ray from Arrow Video, and I think Deep Red would be a very good pick for the first one. So on this list, I've talked a lot about colourful films because for many people, seeing those bright, vibrant colours with an HDR grade on a 4K Blu-ray is what 4K is all about for those people. And I don't disagree. I love seeing a super colourful, vibrant movie on a 4K Blu-ray. And this next film is perhaps one of the most vibrant films that I have ever seen, almost to the point of nausea, that it just the colours popping on screen are just out of this world. The film I'm talking about is Speed Racer, directed by the Wachowskis. Now, this is one that I think would benefit a lot from a 4K Blu-ray, but it's worth noting that this was shot completely digitally on HD video. So because it wasn't shot on a 4K digital format and it wasn't shot on film, there's only so much we could get from an increase in resolution on a 4K disc. But the colours are what could really benefit from a great HDR grade. And that's not even talking about the sound on this movie, because the sound design is just totally crazy. If you've not seen Speed Racer, it's a film that I think perfectly puts you in the subjective view of a child, because the film is very childlike in its wonder, and I just think it's brilliant for how it captures how a child looks at life. I think it has a good chance at getting a 4K Blu-ray, even though it was shot digitally on HD, because it's the Wachowskis and a number of their films have been released on Blu-ray. And of course we have The Matrix 4 coming out this year. Perhaps the momentum of that could bring some of their other movies to 4K Blu-ray, so fingers crossed. And the last film that I've chosen to include on this list, and it was a very hard list to put together, but I have to mention one of my favourite filmmakers, Martin Scorsese. Now, up to this point, I think Martin Scorsese has only had Goodfellas and Casino on a 4K Blu-ray, but we do know Taxi Driver is coming out later in 2021, and there's been rumours that The Wolf of Wall Street is coming from Arrow Video on a 4K Blu-ray, because people have found the postcards that they include in their Blu-rays of Wolf of Wall Street, so there's a pretty good chance that Arrow Video will be doing that, but who knows. So I could have picked many Scorsese films that I would love to get on a 4K Blu-ray, but I'm going to go with Raging Bull. Now, Raging Bull, I think, is a remarkable film, one of Scorsese's best, and again, it's a black and white film, so perhaps not one that people would jump at to get a 4K Blu-ray, but that film is stunning. Like, it's some of the best black and white photography that I have ever seen, and it's a really inventive movie in terms of its composition and the editing, and I just think it would look just so good on a 4K Blu-ray. Scorsese is also a safe bet for these studios financially because his discs always sell well, so fingers crossed we see Raging Bull, or if not, some other Scorsese movies on 4K Blu-ray. There we go, that's my list, but I want to hear your lists in the comments below because I love looking at lists. There's something about seeing films in a list that just does something for me. So yeah, please do send your lists in a comment down below. I want to thank my Patreon supporters for really helping support this channel. I've recently been uploading my collection videos up on there lately, so I've been picking 3 films a week to talk about. So if you want to keep up to date with my collection as it goes on, then check out Patreon. It's patreon.com/Boutique Blu-rays. So that's all for me in this video, but if you want to stick around on the channel, I would suggest clicking one of these videos now, particularly if you've not seen my video on getting a multi-region player to play Blu-rays from all around the world, then definitely check that out here. I'll be back very soon, so until then, as always, stay well and keep watching great movies.